The first time I understood that my husband and my best friend had started speaking about me like I wasn't fully in the room, I was standing outside the nursery with my hand on the doorframe, trying to remember what color we'd said the curtains would be. It was such a stupid thing to be stuck on. Curtains. The room still wasn't finished. The walls were painted a soft cream that had looked warmer in the sample card than it did in real life, and one strip of baseboard near the far corner still needed caulk. Evan had promised to finish it the week after we brought the baby home. After I lost her, the paint cans got shoved into the garage. The little gold hardware for the dresses stayed in a paper bag on the hallway table for almost 3 months, and nobody ever said the sentence out loud again when we bring her home. I kept the door closed most days because the room held smell longer that way. Fresh paint, drywall dust, new wood. It was the closest thing left to anticipation, and some mornings that hurt worse than grief itself. That morning the house smelled like coffee and rosemary candle wax. Maya had brought that candle over 2 weeks earlier, setting it on the kitchen counter with the kind of hopeful brightness people use when they know scent cannot fix anything but want credit for trying. She'd been bringing things a lot lately. Soup from the place near Henderson Road. Folded laundry when I hadn't asked. Grocery bags she carried in without knocking because she still knew where the spare key was. At first it had felt like love. Lately it felt like practice. I was still standing there in one of Evan's old Ohio State sweatshirts staring into the nursery when I heard the back door open and Maya's voice flowed in from the kitchen. "I got the bread she likes," she said. "Not Claire likes. She likes." I don't know why that landed so hard, except that grief makes strange things sharp. Maybe because people only use that tone when they're talking about a child or a patient. Someone who needs managing. Someone whose preferences are information to be handled. I stayed where I was for a second too long, listening. Evan said, "Thanks. She barely ate last night." His voice wasn't cold. That was part of the problem. Neither of them had turned cruel. Cruelty would have given me something clean to push against. What they'd become instead was careful. I walked down the hall slowly enough that they had time to hear my steps before I reached the kitchen. Maya was already unpacking groceries, moving around my counters with the ease of somebody who had done it too many times. She had her dark hair twisted up in a clip, one of my dish towels over her shoulder, and for one disorienting second the scene looked so natural that it made my stomach go hollow. Evan was leaning against the counter with his coffee mug in one hand, watching her with a softness I recognized because it used to belong to me. "Hey," Maya said, turning fast. "Too fast. I brought that sourdough you like." I nodded. "Thanks." She smiled the way people do when they're checking the weather. "How did you sleep?" "Fine." It was a lie, but it was the kind of lie everybody in my life had agreed to accept. Fine meant I had not cried in front of anyone. Fine meant I had not made the day difficult. Evan crossed to the cabinet and reached for a plate before I did, then stopped like he'd suddenly remembered I was there. "Do you want some toast?" It should not have hurt a husband offering toast. But there are gestures that only become painful once they are all that's left. He used to kiss the side of my head when he passed behind me. Now he offered carbohydrates in the same voice he used when asking if I'd taken Tylenol. "I can get it," I said. "Of course," Maya said quickly, stepping back from the counter. "I was just trying to make things easier." I looked at her then. Really looked. At the neat black leggings, the careful mascara, the competent little smile. Maya had always been the kind of woman people described as together. Even in college, when the rest of us showed up to 8 a.m. classes looking half-buried, Maya somehow had matching earrings and a charged phone and gum in her purse for everyone else's bad day. I used to love that about her. I used to think being near her made life feel less slippery. Now every polished thing about her made me feel more unfinished. "I didn't say you weren't," I said. Neither of them answered. It was a small silence, but it had weight. Evan took a sip of coffee. Maya turned back to the grocery bag. I stood there in my own kitchen feeling like I'd interrupted something that didn't want me. The rest of the morning went by in that same soft, irritating way. Maya wiped down my counters. Evan asked if I'd thought about getting out of the house later. They both used the word maybe too much. Maybe a walk would help. Maybe fresh air. Maybe this weekend you could stay with your mom for a couple of nights just for a reset. That last one came from Maya lightly while she was rinsing a mug at the sink. I looked up. "What?" She didn't turn around right away. "Nothing bad. I just meant maybe a change of environment would feel good." Evan stepped in before I could answer. "She's just saying you've been having a hard time here. Here, not with us, not with me. With the house, with the room at the end of the hall, with the fact that every piece of unfinished trim and unopened baby box had started making him uncomfortable too." I said, "Did you two talk about that already?" The question landed. I could tell by the stillness that followed it. Maya shut off the faucet. Claire, no, it's okay, I said, though my voice had already gone thinner than I wanted. I'm just asking. Did you? Evan set his mug down carefully, which was how he handled conflict now, like he could keep it from spilling if he moved slowly enough. We've talked about how worried we are, he said. I don't know if he heard it the way I did. I laughed a little then, not because anything was funny, but because sometimes the body does strange things when it starts breaking in a place too quiet for drama. That wasn't my question. Maya finally turned toward me, her face full of that unbearable kindness. Claire, nobody is trying to upset you. I think that was the moment something inside me shifted. Not loudly, not enough for either of them to notice. Just enough that I stopped feeling confused and started feeling cold. Because upset was not the point. They were not trying to upset me, they were trying to arrange me. I left the kitchen before either of them could soften their voices further. I walked down the hallway with my pulse beating too hard in my throat and went straight into the nursery for the first time in 4 days. The room looked exactly the same as it had the last time I stood in it. The half-built dresser against the wall, the unopened mobile still in its box. The pale rug my mother had found on clearance because I couldn't justify spending full price on something nobody would ever crawl across now. I sat down on the floor with my back against the wall beneath the window and tried to breathe. There is a particular kind of loneliness in realizing people have started making practical plans for your sadness. It is not the loneliness of being alone, it is worse. It is the loneliness of being gently outnumbered. I stayed there long enough for the house to quiet, long enough that I could no longer hear Maya opening cabinets or Evan's footsteps crossing the kitchen tile. My eyes kept drifting to the far corner near the baseboard where the paint looked slightly uneven. We had patched that section after buying the house because the previous owners had hung some heavy shelving there and left a ragged line in the drywall. I remembered that much because Evan had cursed under his breath the whole afternoon while I stood in the doorway laughing at him for getting joint compound in his hair. Back then, every unfinished thing in the room had felt temporary. I pushed myself up off the floor and went over to the corner. Maybe I only needed something solid to look at. Maybe grief makes you notice damage because damage feels honest. Either way, I crouched down and ran my fingers over the trim. That was when I saw it. A hairline crack running up from the baseboard so thin I might have missed it if the afternoon light hadn't angled across the wall just right. The paint around it had a faint uneven rise to it, like the surface was ever so slightly swollen. I pressed my thumb against the spot. The wall gave, not much, just enough. I froze and pressed again, slower this time. There was something wrong under the drywall. Not moisture, not ordinary settling. Something different, something hollow, where it should have been firm. Behind me, I heard floorboards shift in the hallway and instinctively pulled my hand back. Then I looked at the wall, one more time at that tiny wrong place inside the room everyone kept talking about, like it was the problem, and for the first time all day my heart moved aside for something sharper. Whatever Evan and Maya thought they were managing, whatever future they had started arranging in lowered voices and careful phrases, they had not accounted for this. And suddenly I was sure of something I had not been sure of that morning. They were talking about moving me. But the room they wanted me away from was hiding something. I did not sleep much that night. Evan came to bed late, smelling like toothpaste and cold air from the back porch, and slid in beside me with the careful quiet of someone trying not to wake a person he had already spent the day managing. He kept to his side of the mattress. That more than anything told me how far things had shifted. Once grief had made him hold me too tightly. Now it made him polite. I lay facing the window and listened to him breathe. The next morning I started paying attention in a different way, not the desperate kind, not the kind that goes looking for lipstick stains or receipts in coat pockets. It was smaller than that, meaner somehow because of how ordinary it all looked. Maya texted before 8, Evan's phone lit up on the counter while he was in the shower and I caught only the first line before the screen dimmed. If she pushes back, let me. He came out a minute later, toweling his hair, and when he saw me standing there with my mug in my hand, something tightened in his face before it smoothed again. You okay? He asked. It was the question everyone had started using as a door they never meant for me to walk through. I'm making coffee, I said. He nodded too quickly. Maya might stop by later. Might. She came at 11:30 with tomato soup from the deli and a folded cardigan draped over her arm, like I was likely to be cold. I watched her set both things on the kitchen island with the same neat efficiency she brought to everything. Her nails were painted a soft beige, her hair was blown out. She looked like somebody who had all the right instincts and never raised her voice in public. I know you probably don't feel like eating much, she said, but I thought maybe this would be easy. Easy. Another one of their new words. Thanks, I said. She smiled, then glanced toward the hallway. Is Evan upstairs? He left for work an hour ago. Oh, she recovered quickly. Right. He said he had that contractor meeting. He had not told me that. It took effort not to let my face show it. Did he? Maya's expression shifted for half a second. Not guilt. Calculation. Then the soft concern slid back into place. Claire, can I sit with you for a minute? The way she said it made me want to laugh and throw something at the wall at the same time. Like I was a patient she had come to speak with before a difficult procedure. We sat at the kitchen table where she used to drink wine with me on Fridays and complain about the women in her office who replied, all to everything. My whole body remembered those nights even while the room itself felt different now. She folded her hands. I've been thinking about you. That almost undid me because there had been a time when hearing that from her would have felt like shelter. I know I said, She exhaled slowly. I think maybe your moms would be good for a little while, not forever. Just enough to give you a break from all this. Her eyes flicked almost involuntarily toward the hallway, toward the nursery. I said nothing. You don't have to decide anything right this second, she continued. I just think sometimes a reset can help when a space gets too loaded. A space, not your daughter's room, not the room where you painted one wall twice because the first shade felt too yellow, not the room where your husband once stood with his hand on your stomach and cried because he could already picture a crib in the corner. A space. I looked at her so long she finally shifted in her chair. Did Evan ask you to say this? I said. Her lips parted. No, Claire, this is not. Did you two talk about it first? We talk about you because we care about you. There it was, smooth, defensible, morally dressed. I felt something hot and clear move through me, not rage exactly, something steadier. Rage burns fast. This felt colder than that. You mean you talk about what to do with me? Her face changed then, just a little. Enough for me to see the part of her that had stopped thinking of me as an equal, the competent part. The part that had already decided what recovery should look like and was irritated I wasn't doing it on schedule. That's not fair, she said. No, I thought. It wasn't. After she left, I stood in the kitchen for a long time staring at the container of soup she had brought over like it might explain her to me. Then I picked up my phone and called Daniel Reeves, the handyman whose number was still stuck to the fridge from when he'd fixed our back gate last fall. When he answered, I told him I thought we might have some shifting drywall in the nursery and asked if he could stop by that afternoon. He arrived at 2 with a tool bag and the respectful, slightly cautious manner of somebody who understood when a house was carrying more than its visible damage. I led him down the hallway and opened the nursery door. He did not say anything sentimental. I appreciated that instantly. He crouched near the corner I showed him, ran his fingers along the crack, tapped lightly with the handle of a screwdriver and frowned. That's odd, he said. Bad odd. Not necessarily. He glanced up at me. You mind if I cut a small inspection square? Could be an old patch job over empty space. I nodded. The sound of the blade against drywall made my chest tighten. Not because it was loud, but because it felt like we were violating a room that had already held too much unfinished hope. Fine white dust fell onto the drop cloth he'd spread across the rug. He worked carefully, then eased away a neat section of wall. Behind it was darkness, not insulation, not studs packed the way they should have been. A narrow hollow, deliberate and clean. Daniel leaned in, reached with his flashlight, then drew back. There's something in there. For 1 second I couldn't move. He pulled out a bundle wrapped in yellowed wax paper and tied with a faded blue ribbon that looked so out of place in that cavity it almost didn't seem real. Dust clung to the folds. The paper had darkened with age, but the knot was still intact. Daniel held it out to me with both hands. You want me to stay? My throat felt tight. No, that's okay. He hesitated, then set the bundle gently on the dresser and patched the opening loosely enough for later repair. When he left, the house went unnaturally quiet, as if even the refrigerator knew better than to hum. I stood there a long time before I touched it. The ribbon came loose more easily than I expected. Inside were several folded letters, brittle but legible, a small stack of legal-looking notes, and one handwritten page clipped to the top with my grandmother's name on it in the corner. Seeing her handwriting hit me so hard I had to sit down on the floor. I had not seen that writing since I was 19, and helping my mother clean out her desk after she died. My grandmother's handwriting had always been the same, elegant, precise, slightly slanted, like even her grocery lists had expectations. I read only enough at first to understand that this was real. My mother's name. references to private loan, the house, a note about keeping the back room protected for Claire if the property ever circled back through family hands. There was language I didn't fully understand and numbers that made no sense yet, but one line sat in my chest like a stone. Not to be folded into marital equity without disclosure of source. I stared at it until the words blurred. By the time I drove to my mother's house, the packet was back in my bag, and my hands had stopped shaking enough to hold the steering wheel steady. Nora answered the door in old jeans and reading glasses, took one look at my face and stepped aside without asking questions. We spread the papers across her dining room table beneath the hanging light she'd had since I was in middle school. She read more slowly than I did, one hand pressed flat to the edge of the table. "Oh," she said finally. Then quieter, "Oh, Claire," it came out like pain. "What is it?" Her eyes filled in a way mine had not yet managed to. "Your grandmother used money from the family account when the house first came back through resale. I knew she helped. I didn't know she documented it like this. I didn't know she hid it there. Why wouldn't you tell me?" She winced. "Because after she died, everything got messy. And later, when you and Evan bought the place, it felt... Does that it? Your grandmother believed in writing everything down, but she also believed if a marriage was good, certain protections would never have to matter." A humorless laugh moved through me. That worked out. The next morning, at my mother's urging, I met Tessa Monroe in her small office above a real estate firm near Worthington. She read through the packet in silence, then removed her glasses and looked at me with the careful neutrality of somebody about to say something that mattered. "These aren't magical documents," she said. "They don't erase the need for formal review, but they do establish a source trail and intent. Strongly enough that your husband's understanding of the down payment and the house's equity appears incomplete at best." "Incomplete at best," I repeated. She held my gaze. "If decisions are being made around your standing in that house, they should not be made on the assumptions he's been using." I walked out of her office into thin March sunlight and stood on the sidewalk for nearly a minute before I remembered to breathe. That was the deepest part of it, I think. Not just that Evan had drifted toward Maya, not just that the two of them had been discussing my grief like a scheduling problem. It was that they had both begun speaking from inside a future where I had already been made smaller, emotionally, physically, even financially. They had not merely been replacing me, they had been misjudging the ground beneath all three of us. That night I went back into the nursery with the letters in my hands. The room had not changed. The pale walls were still pale. The unfinished baseboards still waited in the corner. The grief was still there too, not gone, not gentler. But it felt different now. Less like a place where I had been left behind. More like a room that had been keeping something for me until I was strong enough to know what I was holding. I sat in the middle of the floor and read my grandmother's handwriting again until the words steadied inside me. Then I looked at the doorway. Evan and Maya still thought they were guiding me toward the obvious next step. They thought I was too tired, too sad, too uncertain to do anything but absorb what they decided was healthiest. For the first time in months, I knew exactly what I was going to do. I was going to let them walk into this room and tell me what they thought my life should look like. And then I was going to answer them. And then I was going to answer them. I waited until Sunday afternoon. Maya came first, because of course she did. She knocked once and let herself in before I reached the front door, calling my name in that soft, careful voice she had started using, like every conversation with me might need a landing pad. She was wearing a cream sweater and carrying a bakery box from the place we used to go after yoga on Saturdays, back when my body still felt like mine. "Evan's right behind me," she said. Traffic was weird. I nodded and stepped aside. "Can you go into the nursery?" She blinked. "Now." "Yes." That was the first moment I saw real uncertainty move through her. Not fear, not yet. Just the mild disorientation people feel when the version of you they've gotten used to stops cooperating. She recovered quickly, gave me a small searching look and walked down the hallway without another question. Evan arrived less than 2 minutes later, keys still in his hand, his face already arranged in concern before he had even closed the door. He had gotten good at that expression. Thoughtful forehead, relaxed mouth, a man preparing to handle something difficult with grace. "Hey," he said. "You okay?" "No," I said. "Come into the nursery." That made him pause. For a second I thought he might resist, might ask why or tell me this wasn't the right time, but curiosity pulled him forward. Maybe confidence did. Maybe he still believed whatever was happening could be managed if he stayed calm enough. The three of us ended up standing in that unfinished room with the late afternoon light moving across the cream walls. The patched section near the corner was visible if you knew where to look. The half-built dresser sat against one wall. The unopened mobile was still in its box on the floor. No one said anything for a moment. Maya folded her arms loosely. Evan slipped his keys into his pocket. He was the one who spoke first. "Claire, if this is about the other day, I think we should all take a breath before it is about the other day," I said. "And the week before that. And all the other conversations you two have had about me like I wasn't the one living here." Silence. Maya glanced at Evan, small and quick. I saw it because I had started seeing everything. Evan kept his voice level. "Nobody has been talking about you in a cruel way." "I know," I said. "That's what makes it uglier." His expression changed almost imperceptibly. Not anger. Caution. I went on before either of them could interrupt. "You've both been using the same words. Rest, space, healing, reset. You say them like you're helping me, but what you mean is removal. You mean my mother's house. You mean away from this room, away from this house, away from whatever version of your lives has gotten easier when I'm not in the middle of it." Maya's face flushed. "That is not fair." I looked at her. "You lost the right to tell me what fair looks like." She inhaled sharply, but Evan stepped in before she could answer. "This isn't about replacing you," he said. "This is about the fact that you've been drowning in here, Claire. We've both been trying to support you. There it was again. The quiet little team they'd built while calling it concern. I said, support would have sounded like talking to me, not planning around me. "We were trying not to overwhelm you." "No," I said. "You were trying not to hear me say no." That landed harder than I expected. Evan's jaw tightened. Maya looked down at the rug. I had wondered before this moment whether I would cry, whether the room would undo me, whether saying it all out loud would make me sound as unstable as they had both started assuming I was. Instead, I felt almost strangely calm. Not because I hurt less, because I hurt cleanly now. Maya tried next in that low, earnest tone she used when she wanted to sound morally blameless. "Claire, nobody is saying you don't belong here. We just think some distance from this room, from all of this, might help you see things more clearly." I almost laughed. "This room is the only place I've seen anything clearly in months." They both looked at me then. I crossed to the dresser and picked up the packet. The old ribbon was tucked inside the papers, now fragile and faded. I held the stack carefully, not like evidence exactly, but not like memory alone either. Evan frowned. "What is that?" This, I said, was inside the wall. Neither of them moved. I watched the sentence reach them. Maya looked toward the patched section before she could stop herself. Evan followed her glance, then looked back at me. "What do you mean inside the wall?" "I mean there was a cavity in the drywall in the corner. Daniel found it when I had him come look at the crack." I kept my voice even. "There were letters in there, legal notes, a handwritten property addendum from my grandmother." Evan's eyes narrowed slightly. "Claire, no," I said. "Let me finish. You've both had plenty of time." That shut him up. I laid the top page on the dresser where they could see it, though neither stepped closer yet. "My grandmother hid these years ago when this house passed through family hands the first time. My mother didn't know the full extent of it. Tessa Munro reviewed everything Friday morning. At the mention of a lawyer, something in Evan's face sharpened. "What lawyer?" "A real one," I said. "The kind who reads before she talks." Maya looked between us. "Claire, what exactly are you saying?" I met her eyes. "I'm saying the down payment on this house wasn't what I was later told it was." Evan went very still. That more than anything confirmed it for me. He had not expected this direction. Not from me, not from this room. I continued because I could feel his instinct already gathering itself, preparing to explain, to soften, to translate. The money trail back to my family was documented. So was my grandmother's intent. So was the fact that this room was meant to remain protected if the house ever came back through family ownership. "You've both been talking about this house like it's a practical asset that can be reorganized around my grief, and that understanding was incomplete at best." Evan found his voice. "Hold on. Incomplete at best, Claire, that's a very dramatic way to describe old paperwork you barely understand." He almost had the old tone right. Reasonable, grounded. The husband trying to keep things proportionate, but I heard the strain under it now. "I understand enough," I said, because I had someone explain it to me who wasn't sleeping in my bed or using my spare key. Maya flinched. Evan's face hardened. "Nobody has done anything to you." The sentence sat between us for a second, absurd in its neatness. I said, "You really think this is about proving whether you kissed her?" He opened his mouth and shut it again. That was answer enough. I did not need a confession. I did not need messages full of hearts or hotel receipts or some dramatic scene out of a television show. I had already seen the truth in the shape of their alliance, in the way Maya spoke for him, in the way he let her. Intimacy is not always bodies first. Sometimes it is management, sometimes it is two people building language together until the third person in the room becomes a problem to solve. You made me into someone discussable, I said quietly. That's what you did. You turned me into a set of concerns, a schedule, a fragile situation. And you did it while standing inside a house that had more of my family in it than you ever understood. Maya's eyes filled then, but I felt almost nothing in response. Not cruelty, just distance. I was trying to help, she said. No, I said, you were trying to matter. That hit her harder than I intended, and maybe because it was true. She shook her head. That's not, it is. You liked being the competent one, the one who knew what needed to happen, the one he could lean on. I looked at Evan then, and you liked having someone who made all of this feel less messy. Someone who didn't remind you every time you looked at her that we lost a child. He looked away first. That, I think, was the moment the room changed. Not because I had won anything, not because the hurt was gone, but because the performance had stopped working. There was no version of me left in that nursery for them to manage politely. No trembling woman grateful for guidance, no confused wife asking for reassurance, just me standing in the room where we had once planned a life, holding papers they had never accounted for and naming the thing they had done in plain English. Evan rubbed a hand over his mouth. What do you want from me right now? The question would have broken me a month earlier. It sounded so practical, so tired, so much like a man standing at the edge of consequences he had hoped to avoid by staying soft-spoken. I want you to stop acting like this is about what's healthiest for me, I said. It's about what became easiest for you. He looked at the floor. Maya whispered, Claire. I turned to her. You don't get to be the gentle voice in this room anymore. She started crying then, quietly in a way that might once have moved me. Evan reached toward her on instinct, then seemed to realize what he was doing and let his hand fall. That small movement told the truth all by itself. I gathered the papers back together slowly. My fingers were steady. Whatever legal steps come next, I said, they will happen with full information. Whatever happens to this marriage happens with the truth named correctly. And whatever happens to this house will not happen because the two of you decided I was too broken to stay standing. Neither of them argued. I don't know whether it was the documents or the shame or just the fact that clarity is harder to push against than pain. Maybe all three. Evan finally said, I never wanted to hurt you. I believed him, which was part of what made it so devastating. Maybe not, I said, but you wanted a version of life that required less from you. And once I became the hardest part of it, you stopped protecting me from anything. Even her. Maya made a wounded sound, but I was past softening things for the comfort of people who had not softened them for mine. A few minutes later they left the nursery. Not dramatically. No slammed doors. No shouting. Just two people walking out of a room they had misunderstood, carrying the weight of themselves differently than when they came in. I heard the front door close. Then the house was quiet. I stayed where I was. The light had shifted lower now, turning one wall pale gold. Dust moved gently in the air where the patch section still showed faintly in the corner. The room was still unfinished. Still sad. The rug was still too clean because no baby had ever crawled across it. The mobile was still in its unopened box. Nothing about that changed. But the room no longer felt like evidence against me. I sat down on the floor with my back against the dresser and unfolded one of my grandmother's letters again. Her handwriting moved across the page in that steady slant, practical and elegant at once. I thought about all the women whose lives had touched this house before mine. My grandmother hiding papers inside a wall because she knew love and money did not always travel honestly together. My mother carrying pieces of the story without all of it. Me years later standing in the exact room where everyone had started treating my grief like a reason to move me aside. Outside somewhere down the block a dog barked once and fell silent. A car passed slowly. The world kept going in that ordinary way it always does, even after something private breaks for good. I rested the letter in my lap and looked around the nursery one more time. It was still the room where I had lost something, but it was also the room where they stopped being able to take anything else.